"You look tired, sir," said the tiny girl on the plane, breaking the silence as she crawled onto the empty first-class seat beside him. Antonio Bianchi, feared leader of New York's most powerful crime family, glanced down at the intruder with her pink backpack and missing front tooth, annoyed at the interruption of his peace. The flight attendant hurried over with an apologetic smile, whispering frantically to the child. "Maggie, honey, you need to return to your seat with your mommy," she urged, casting nervous glances at the notorious businessman whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. "It's fine," Antonio said, surprising himself as much as the attendant who retreated with a nod. He adjusted his Italian silk tie, a habit formed through decades of boardroom intimidation, wondering why he hadn't sent the child away immediately. Maggie pulled a chocolate chip cookie wrapped in plastic from her pocket, the treat already broken into uneven pieces. "When things break, they're easier to share," she announced, offering him the larger half with small fingers that hadn't yet known life's cruelties. Antonio accepted the cookie with a slight nod, his calloused fingers, once used to count cash and occasionally worse, now delicately holding the crumbly offering. The sweetness surprised him, having forgotten the simple pleasure of childhood treats amidst years of expensive whiskeys and power plays. The child retrieved a small notepad and crayon from her backpack, her tongue poking out in concentration as she began to draw. Antonio found himself studying her, this tiny creature so utterly unconcerned with who he was or what he controlled. "That's you," she declared, holding up a purple stick figure with an exaggerated frown. "And this is me," she added, pointing to a smaller figure with an enormous smile, their stick hands connected in what appeared to be friendship. A woman with auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail appeared in the aisle, relief washing over her face. "I'm so sorry, sir," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous way she tucked her hair behind her ear. "My daughter wandered off while I was helping an elderly passenger." "Your cookie was good," Antonio replied, directing his words to the child rather than the mother. He folded the drawing and slipped it into his suit pocket, a gesture so uncharacteristic that his bodyguard 3 rows back raised an eyebrow in concern. The mother, Rachel Porter according to the name tag on her flight attendant uniform, gently took her daughter's hand. "Come on, Maggie, we need to get back to work," she whispered, avoiding eye contact with the intimidating man whose reputation had reached mythic proportions in the city. "He needs a nap, Mommy," Maggie announced loudly as she was led away. "His eyes are sleepy, like when you work double shifts," her innocent voice carrying down the aisle as passengers pretended not to listen. Antonio watched them go, the child's observation lingering in the air like an accusation. He hadn't truly rested in years, the weight of his empire, and the constant vigilance required to maintain it, preventing any real peace. For the remainder of the flight, Antonio found himself glancing toward the economy section, where the young flight attendant moved efficiently between passengers. There was something in her determined efficiency, the gentle way she handled her daughter between duties, that stirred something long dormant within him. The plane landed with a gentle bump at JFK, and Antonio straightened his custom suit jacket as his security detail formed around him. Through the sea of suits and earpieces, he caught a final glimpse of the little girl waving enthusiastically, as if they were old friends. "Sir, your car is waiting," his right-hand man, Bruno, reminded him, concern evident in his voice. Antonio nodded, returning to reality as he exited the aircraft, the child's drawing still in his pocket like contraband, a dangerous piece of innocence in a world built on its absence. That night in his penthouse overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, Antonio found himself unfolding the purple crayon drawing. The stick figures stared back at him, the simplicity of their connection more honest than anything in his carefully constructed world. He poured himself 3 fingers of aged scotch, the amber liquid catching the light as memories from 30 years ago surfaced unbidden. Before the family business consumed him, before his name inspired fear rather than friendship, there had been another life possible. The nightmares came as they always did, violent echoes of choices made and lives taken in service to power and control. Antonio woke gasping at 3 a.m., his silk sheets drenched in sweat despite the carefully regulated temperature of his bedroom. Dawn found him in his private gym, punishing his body with physical exertion to quiet his mind. Bruno entered silently, waiting for acknowledgement before speaking. "The Calabrese family is making noise again about the waterfront property, sir. They're suggesting a meeting." Antonio toweled off, his expression hardening into the mask he wore for the world. "Tell them I'm not interested in meetings or suggestions," he replied, his voice cold and final like a judge passing sentence. Later that afternoon, during a rare moment alone, Antonio found himself reaching for the child's drawing again. It had been placed carefully in his desk drawer, alongside a faded photograph of his mother, the only woman who had known him before he became what the world now feared. "Sir, your 3 o'clock is here," his assistant announced through the intercom, her voice professional and distant. Antonio tucked both items back into the drawer, locking away vulnerability with practiced ease. The weeks that followed were filled with the usual business, legitimate real estate ventures layered over darker dealings that remained unspoken in boardrooms. Yet Antonio found himself scanning crowds in restaurants, on streets, his attention caught by any child Maggie's age or woman with auburn hair. "You've been distracted," Bruno observed one evening, as they reviewed security protocols for an upcoming deal. His tone was careful, the observation itself a risk given Antonio's legendary intolerance for personal commentary from his staff. Antonio dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand, though the observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. The child's simple question had somehow worked its way under his skin like a splinter, painless at first, now increasingly difficult to ignore. A report landed on his desk detailing the backgrounds of all first-class passengers from the flight, including one Rachel Porter, single mother, flight attendant for 7 years. The photograph clipped to the file matched his memory. Determined eyes, practical beauty, no wedding ring. March brought unexpected snow to New York City, blanketing the grime of the streets with temporary purity. Antonio stood at his office window watching the transformation, wondering why the thought of a flight attendant and her daughter continued to linger like an unfinished symphony. The invitation to his nephew's wedding arrived embossed with gold and expectation, another opportunity for the family to display unity and power. Antonio confirmed his attendance with a quick signature, already calculating the business that could be conducted amid the celebration. "We have a situation," Bruno announced 3 days later, his usual stoic expression betraying subtle concern. "The Calabrese family seems to be moving against our interests more aggressively than anticipated. They've acquired property adjacent to our development on the Upper East Side." The crisp April morning found Antonio walking through Central Park, a rare moment without his security detail. The solitude was both foreign and welcome, a small rebellion against the constant surveillance that defined his existence. He spotted them near the duck pond, the flight attendant reading on a bench while her daughter tossed breadcrumbs to the eager waterfowl. Antonio froze mid-step, unprepared for the strange leap in his chest at the sight of these virtual strangers. Maggie noticed him first, her delighted shriek carrying across the tranquil morning scene. "Cookie Man," she called out, abandoning her feeding duties to race toward him with unrestrained enthusiasm that defied the caution he inspired in most adults. Rachel's head snapped up from her book, recognition and alarm crossing her face in quick succession as her daughter barreled toward the powerful man, whose reputation in New York was the stuff of whispered legends. She rushed after Maggie, catching her just before she could collide with Antonio's immaculately pressed trousers. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Bianchi," Rachel said, her voice controlled despite the flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Antonio noted with interest that she knew his name, though he hadn't introduced himself during their brief encounter on the plane. Maggie tugged against her mother's restraining hand, undeterred by adult complexities. "Did you keep my picture?" she demanded, peering up at him with unabashed curiosity, her small pink coat buttoned unevenly in what must have been her own attempt at independence. "I did," Antonio replied, surprising himself with the admission. He crouched down to the child's level, an action so uncharacteristic that had his associates witnessed it, they might have questioned his identity or sanity. Rachel watched the interaction with wary fascination, her protective instincts visibly battling with her daughter's obvious delight. "We should let Mr. Bianchi continue his walk, Maggie," she prompted gently, her fingers tightening slightly around her daughter's small hand. Antonio rose to his full height, suddenly aware of how his presence had altered the peaceful morning for this woman and her child. "Please, don't leave on my account," he offered, gesturing to the bench Rachel had abandoned in her haste. "Do you feed ducks too?" Maggie asked, holding out her paper bag of breadcrumbs with the generous spirit unique to children. The simplicity of the offer stood in stark contrast to the complex negotiations and veiled threats that typically filled Antonio's days. Before Antonio could respond, the shrill ring of his cell phone cut through the moment. Bruno's name flashed on the screen, reality intruding with its usual poor timing and uncompromising demands. "I have to take this," Antonio stated, authority returning to his voice as he stepped away to answer. The call was brief, but consequential. Information about the Calabrese family's next move requiring his immediate attention. When he turned back, Rachel was already leading Maggie away, their figures growing smaller against the backdrop of springtime green. Antonio watched them go, feeling an unfamiliar hollow sensation expand in his chest as the distance between them increased. A light rain began to fall, droplets catching on cherry blossoms and creating a crystalline curtain between Antonio and the retreating figures. He remained rooted to the spot, an unusual hesitation gripping a man accustomed to decisive action in all matters. The ducks continued their eager circling in the pond, indifferent to human complexities, as they searched for remaining breadcrumbs. Antonio found himself envying their simple existence, governed by instinct, rather than the elaborate chess game his life had become. "Mr. Bianchi, your car has arrived at the east entrance," Bruno informed him upon arrival, his questioning gaze taking in the uncharacteristic location but wisely offering no comment. Antonio nodded, falling back into the rhythm of his position as they walked to the waiting vehicle. The surveillance photos landed on Antonio's desk with the weight of an imminent storm, Rachel and Maggie captured in various locations around the city. Bruno's expression remained neutral as he explained. "The Calabrese family has been watching them for 3 weeks now, sir. They believe there's a connection." Antonio's rage was a cold, calculated thing as he studied the images, his knuckles whitening around the edge of his imported mahogany desk. These were civilians, a flight attendant and her daughter, now unwittingly caught in the crosshairs of a generations-old power struggle. "Find them," Antonio commanded, already reaching for his coat. "Bring them to the Westchester property until we resolve this situation." His tone left no room for discussion or debate, the decision made with the same finality that had built his empire. The rain had just begun to fall when Antonio's men located Rachel's modest Queen's apartment, arriving moments before the Calabrese enforcers. The timing was providence or luck. Antonio wasn't sure which, but he wouldn't waste the opportunity either way. Rachel's face drained of color when she opened the door to find Antonio flanked by 2 stern-faced men in dark suits. "We don't have time to explain fully," he stated, the urgency in his voice cutting through her confusion. "You and Maggie are in danger. You need to come with us now." The sound of a car screeching to a halt outside galvanized Rachel into action, a mother's instinct to protect overriding fear or hesitation. She scooped up Maggie and a small backpack, following Antonio's lead without further question. They escaped through the service entrance as Calabrese's men breached the front door, the near miss highlighting the gravity of their situation. In the armored SUV speeding toward Westchester, Rachel's questions tumbled out in a mixture of fear and indignation. "They believe hurting you would hurt me," Antonio explained, his usual composure strained under the weight of guilt. "The Calabrese family has been watching you since our encounter on the plane, looking for leverage in a business dispute." Maggie, remarkably calm amidst the chaos, reached across the leather seat to pat Antonio's hand. "Are the bad guys chasing us?" she asked, her understanding of the situation filtered through the fairy tales and cartoon villains that populated her young world. The Westchester estate rose from the landscape like a fortress disguised as a luxury home, its security systems and personnel providing a barrier between the innocent and those who would harm them. Antonio watched as Rachel took in the scale of his world, her expression shifting between awe and apprehension. "You'll stay here until it's safe," Antonio informed them as his housekeeper, Mrs. Petrovich, showed them to adjoining rooms decorated in soothing tones of blue and cream. "My men will retrieve whatever you need from your apartment once we're certain it's clear." Rachel waited until they were alone, Maggie distracted by the child-sized furniture that appeared to have been hastily arranged in one corner of the spacious bedroom. "Why would you do this for us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, searching his face for hidden motives. Antonio considered several answers before settling on the simplest truth. "Because no child should suffer for the sins of men like me," he replied, memories of his own fractured childhood bleeding into the present moment like watercolors on wet paper. The days that followed established a strange new routine. Antonio conducting business from his home office while Rachel and Maggie settled into the protected environment of his estate. Security reports arrived hourly, tracking Calabrese movements and intentions with methodical precision. Maggie discovered the piano in the East Wing, her small fingers experimenting with keys that hadn't been touched in years. Antonio found himself pausing outside the music room, listening to her discordant melodies with unexpected pleasure, the mansion filling with sounds other than hushed business conversations. Rachel established her own domain in the estate's neglected kitchen garden, coaxing life from dormant soil with the same patient determination she applied to all aspects of her life. Antonio watched from his office window as she knelt in the dirt, teaching Maggie about growth and nurturing, lessons he'd never properly learned himself. Bruno voiced his concerns during a private meeting in the study, the crackling fireplace underscoring the gravity of their discussion. The family is questioning your judgment, Antonio. Protecting strangers at such cost. They don't understand your motivation, and uncertainty makes them nervous. Once upon a time, there was a lonely king who forgot how to smile. Antonio heard Rachel's voice drifting down the hallway as he passed Maggie's room after a grueling video conference with his West Coast operations. He paused, drawn by the gentle cadence of her storytelling. Through the partially open door, he watched as Rachel created shadow puppets against the wall, her graceful hands transforming into birds and wolves as Maggie giggled from beneath her covers. The scene was so removed from his reality that Antonio felt like an intruder in his own home. The king needed a friend, not more gold, Rachel continued, unaware of his presence. Antonio retreated silently, her words following him down the corridor like persistent ghosts seeking acknowledgement. Breakfast the next morning brought an unexpected shift, as Maggie insisted Antonio join them at the kitchen table, rather than taking his usual coffee in solitude. "You need pancakes," she declared with the authority only a child could muster in his presence. Rachel's hands moved with surprising skill as she prepared the meal, revealing an ease in the kitchen that Antonio hadn't anticipated. "I was in culinary school before Maggie came along," she explained, noticing his observation of her technique. "Life took a different turn, but I kept the skills." The domesticity of the moment struck Antonio with unexpected force. How long had it been since someone had cooked specifically for him without expectation or agenda? His personal chef prepared what was requested. His restaurant served what impressed clients and associates. "These have blueberry faces," Maggie announced proudly, pointing to her artistic arrangement on Antonio's plate. The innocence of the gesture created a hairline fracture in the walls he'd built around himself, over decades of calculated isolation. Rachel watched their interaction with cautious optimism, her initial fear of Antonio gradually transforming into something more complex. "She's never had a consistent male figure in her life," she admitted one evening, as they shared a rare glass of wine after Maggie had gone to bed. Antonio found himself sharing more than he intended that night, stories of his childhood in the old neighborhood before the family business consumed everything. "My father believed power was the only protection in this world," he explained, swirling the burgundy liquid in his glass reflectively. The buzzing of Antonio's secure phone interrupted their conversation, another crisis requiring immediate attention. Rachel didn't question his abrupt departure, having grown accustomed to the rhythm of emergencies that punctuated his existence. Hours later, Antonio returned to find his study transformed. A small birthday cake with a single candle sat on his desk, alongside a handmade card decorated with Maggie's distinctive purple crayon artwork. "Happy Boss Day," read the childish scrawl inside, the misspelled message triggering an unexpected lump in his throat. "She couldn't sleep until we made it for you," Rachel explained from the doorway, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Apparently today is the anniversary of when you met on the plane. She's been counting." Antonio stared at the simple chocolate cake, overwhelmed by the genuine gesture devoid of ulterior motive or calculation. "Thank you," he managed, the words feeling inadequate for the emotion behind them. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Antonio carefully cut 3 slices of cake, a domestic ritual entirely foreign to his experience. Rachel found extra candles in a kitchen drawer, placing them in each slice with ceremonial precision as Maggie clapped with delight. Antonio's phone remained deliberately silenced, business emergencies temporarily relegated to secondary importance, a subtle shift that didn't escape Rachel's notice. Her questioning glance met his reassuring nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that some moments deserve protection from the outside world's demands. The security breach came 2 days later, a trusted employee selling information to the Calabrese family about Rachel and Maggie's location. Antonio's reaction was swift and merciless, a reminder to Rachel of exactly who he was beneath the softening she had witnessed. "I won't apologize for protecting what matters," he told her afterward, finding her in the garden where she stood wrapped in a cardigan against the evening chill. The unspoken acknowledgement that she and Maggie had become something precious hung between them, neither ready to define exactly what that meant. The quarterly board meeting was proceeding with its usual calculated precision when the boardroom door burst open, revealing Maggie in a princess costume complete with plastic tiara. "Mr. Bruno said you forgot lunch," she announced, marching toward Antonio with a paper bag clutched in her small hand. 12 of New York's most intimidating business figures watched in stunned silence as Antonio Bianchi, feared leader, ruthless negotiator, gently accepted the lunch from a 4-year-old girl in a sparkly crown. "Thank you, Maggie," he replied with remarkable composure. "Please tell Ms. Rachel I'll be home for dinner." The whispers began immediately after Maggie skipped out, Bruno closing the door behind her with an apologetic nod. Antonio ignored the speculative glances, continuing the presentation, as if the domestic interruption were the most natural occurrence in his tightly controlled world. Later that evening, Rachel confronted him in his home office, mortification evident in her flushed cheeks. "Bruno shouldn't have let her interrupt your meeting," she insisted, pacing the expensive carpet. "I had no idea she was planning her little delivery mission." Antonio surprised them both by laughing, a genuine sound rarely heard in the halls of his estate. "You should have seen their faces," he admitted, recalling the shocked expressions of men who prided themselves on being unflappable. "Maggie accomplished more disruption in 30 seconds than my competitors have managed in years." The shift in their relationship happened gradually, like seasons changing, Rachel relaxing her guard as Antonio revealed more of himself beyond the powerful facade. Their conversation stretched longer into evenings, covering topics from philosophy to favorite childhood memories. Antonio taught Rachel to play chess one rainy afternoon, his strategic mind finding new pleasure in watching her quickly grasp concepts and develop her own unpredictable style. Maggie created her own version of the game beside them, making up fantastical rules that involved her stuffed animals as additional pieces. The library, once Antonio's formal reception space for business associates, gradually transformed into a family sanctuary, with Rachel's paperback novels mingling with leather-bound classics on shelves now accessible rather than intimidating. Mrs. Petrovich found herself rearranging furniture to accommodate storybook sessions and impromptu pillow forts without being instructed. "You have actual cooks on staff. Why would you want me to prepare dinner?" Rachel questioned when Antonio requested she take over meal planning for the household. Her practical nature remained suspicious of unexpected generosity, a trait that had served her well as a single mother. Antonio's answer was simple yet profound in its honesty. "Because when you cook, it feels like a home rather than a house," he admitted, the vulnerability in his expression momentarily transforming his features into something younger, less burdened by the weight of his position. The invitation to his nephew's wedding created unexpected complications. Attending alone would generate unwanted questions, but bringing Rachel and Maggie would make a statement neither was prepared to acknowledge publicly. The solution came from an unexpected source. "Family events require family," Antonio's mother declared during her weekly call, her authority undiminished by age or distance. "Bring the woman and child I've been hearing about. I wish to meet these people who have captured my son's attention after so many years of solitude." The preparation for the wedding became a family affair of its own, Rachel helping Antonio select an appropriate gift, while Maggie practiced flower girl techniques, despite not being officially part of the ceremony. The domestic rhythm they established felt dangerously close to permanence. "Your world and mine were never meant to intersect," Rachel murmured one evening, as they swayed to old jazz records in the kitchen, Maggie asleep upstairs after an impromptu dance lesson that had left them all breathless with laughter. What happens when this thread is over? The question hung between them, neither ready to voice the answer they feared or hoped for. Antonio pulled her closer instead, the scent of her shampoo and the warmth of her presence temporarily silencing the warnings that had guided his life choices for decades. Bruno interrupted with uncharacteristic hesitation the following morning, waiting until Maggie had left for her scheduled playdate with Mrs. Petrovich's grandchildren. "The Calabresi family has proposed a meeting. Neutral ground, traditional protocols, they're offering terms." Antonio considered the implications, weighing options with the strategic precision that had built his empire. "Arrange it," he finally decided, his gaze drifting toward the garden where Rachel's influence had introduced wildflowers among the meticulously planned landscaping, beauty emerging from carefully controlled chaos. The confrontation that everyone had anticipated came from an unexpected direction, not from business rivals, but from Rachel herself, after discovering the extent of Antonio's operations during an accidental glimpse at documents left on his desk. "You promised me we weren't in danger," she accused, betrayal evident in her trembling voice. "I never promised safety. I promised protection," Antonio replied, his voice low and controlled as he faced Rachel across the expanse of his desk. The distinction mattered to him, even if it seemed insignificant to her in that moment of raw discovery. Rachel gathered Maggie's scattered toys with trembling hands, her decision written in every deliberate movement. "We've been living in a fantasy," she whispered, more to herself than to him, pretending this arrangement could ever be anything but temporary. Antonio watched her preparations with a growing sense of desperation foreign to his carefully ordered existence. For the first time in decades, he found himself without a strategic response, without leverage or control over outcomes that suddenly mattered more than empire or power. The Calabrese meeting loomed like a gathering storm, tensions escalating as Antonio's rivals sensed distraction in a man previously known for singular focus. Reports of movement against his territories filtered in hourly, each a deliberate provocation testing his resolve. "You're compromised," Bruno stated flatly during their preparation session, years of loyalty earning him the right to speak uncomfortable truths. "The family is questioning your judgment while our enemies grow bolder. Something must change before we lose everything." The solution came to Antonio as he stood in the doorway of Maggie's room, watching her sleep amid the stuffed animals and child-sized furniture that had transformed a wing of his fortress into a home. Her peaceful breathing crystallized his understanding with brutal clarity. This life or his empire, not both. Rachel found him in his study at midnight, papers spread across his desk in ordered chaos, the framework of a new existence taking shape through legal documents and transfer protocols. "What are you doing?" she asked, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself against more than physical chill. Antonio gestured to the chair opposite his desk, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his laptop screen. "Creating distance," he answered simply, "between the Bianchi name and everything associated with it, including you and Maggie." The explanation unfolded like a complex origami of legal and financial maneuvers, a separation from family operations, strategic transfers of legitimate businesses, arrangements for successors in territories he controlled. Each page represented a deliberate dismantling of power structures built over generations. "Why would you do this?" Rachel asked, the question echoing their earlier conversation at the estate's entrance, though now laden with new understanding of exactly what Antonio was sacrificing. "Your family, your position, it's everything you've ever known." Antonio's response came without hesitation, a truth recognized too late yet with perfect clarity. "Not everything," he replied, his gaze holding hers across the desk that had once represented the barrier between their worlds, rather than a bridge. The hospital corridors seemed endless, as Antonio followed the urgent path of emergency personnel, the antiseptic smell burning his nostrils as he fought to maintain composure. The Calabrese attack had come without warning, a desperate move against a target they believed would cripple Antonio's resolve. Rachel's pale face against the stark white hospital linens would haunt Antonio for years to come, the cost of his world colliding with hers now measured in blood and surgical procedures. "Maggie?" she whispered when consciousness returned, maternal concern overriding personal pain. "Safe," Antonio assured her, his hand engulfing hers with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Mrs. Petrovich has her at the secondary location. No one knows where they are." The relief in Rachel's expression was worth every empire he might surrender. The doctor spoke in hushed tones outside Rachel's room, terms like internal bleeding and surgical intervention, filtering through the partially closed door. Antonio absorbed each word with the focused attention he typically reserved for business intelligence, mentally calculating recovery timelines and potential complications. Bruno arrived with a small pink unicorn clutched awkwardly in his massive hand, a peace offering from Maggie, who insisted her favorite toy would help her mother heal faster. The hardened security chief's gentle placement of the stuffed animal on Rachel's bedside table revealed unexpected dimensions to a man defined by professional stoicism. The choice presented itself with brutal simplicity as Antonio faced the Calabrese patriarch across the negotiation table 3 days later. "One final offer," the older man stated, sliding a document across polished mahogany. "The waterfront properties, your interests in shipping, and complete withdrawal from disputed territories." The first snowfall of December transformed New York into a temporary wonderland, covering the grit and noise of the city with pristine white silence. Antonio adjusted his scarf against the chill as he waited outside the elementary school gates, an unfamiliar routine that had become treasured ritual. "Mr. Tony," Maggie's excited voice carried across the playground as she raced toward him, pink backpack bouncing with each step. The nickname, her creation, had initially discomforted him, but now he couldn't imagine responding to anything else from those small, trusting lips. 5 months had passed since Antonio Bianchi had shocked New York's underworld by relinquishing control of his family's operations, transferring power to his cousin Paolo, while retaining only legitimate business interests. The transition had been neither smooth nor without consequence. The modest brownstone in Brooklyn represented everything his previous life was not. Warm, accessible, deliberately ordinary in its comforts. Rachel had insisted on paying half the rent, her pride requiring partnership rather than patronage, despite Antonio's considerable remaining wealth. "Can we go skating today?" Maggie asked as they walked hand in hand through snow-dusted streets, her breath forming small clouds in the winter air. "You promised when it snowed enough to cover the cars, we could go to Rockefeller Center." Antonio found himself checking sightlines and exit routes out of habit, the instincts of decades not easily abandoned despite his change in status. The threat had diminished but not disappeared, a reality he acknowledged while refusing to allow it to confine them to shadows. The ice rink glittered with holiday lights, as families circled in varying degrees of skill and confidence. Ordinary joy that had once seemed as foreign to Antonio as another language. Rachel joined them after her culinary school class, her cheeks flushed with cold and accomplishment. "I got the internship," she announced as they shared hot chocolate at a small cafe overlooking the rink. "Chef Bernard wants me to start after the new year. It's only part-time, but it's with one of the best restaurants in the city." Antonio's pride in her achievement surprised him with its intensity. This investment in another person's dreams, a new territory as unfamiliar and exhilarating as the ice beneath inexperienced feet. "We should celebrate," he suggested, already planning details in the methodical way he approached all things. The Christmas tree in their living room was modest in size, but extravagant in ornaments, each selected by Maggie with serious deliberation during weekend shopping expeditions. Antonio found himself mesmerized by the colored lights reflecting off glass balls and tinsel strands, childhood memories resurfacing like long-submerged treasures. "Your mother called again," Rachel mentioned as they prepared dinner together, a domestic choreography developed over months of cohabitation. "She's insisting we join her for Christmas Eve dinner. I think she's deployed your aunts as reinforcements this time." The reconciliation with his family had been gradual, facilitated by his mother's practical acceptance of changed circumstances. "A good son who visits regularly is better than a powerful son who has no time," she had declared, effectively ending family debate on the matter of Antonio's choices. Antonio's nephew, Carlo, approached him during the family's Christmas gathering, awkwardly seeking advice on business school applications rather than family operations. The tentative bridge between Antonio's past and present lives brought unexpected satisfaction, influence exercised through mentorship rather than authority. The holiday playlist filling their home reflected their blended sensibilities. Rachel's contemporary favorites intermingled with Antonio's classical preferences and Maggie's inevitable children's songs. This soundtrack of their shared life accompanied evening rituals of hot chocolate and story time that had become sacred in their household calendar. Bruno visited occasionally, providing updates on family matters and subtly checking Antonio's continued resolve. "Paolo is doing well enough," he reported during their most recent meeting, "though he lacks your strategic vision. Some adjustments have been necessary." The small velvet box weighed heavily in Antonio's pocket as he and Rachel strolled through Bryant Park's winter village on Christmas Eve, Maggie running ahead to admire the elaborate displays. The timing felt right, a new year approaching, foundations of trust established, shared life no longer an untested theory. Rachel's expression when she opened the box contained multitudes, surprise, joy, and something like amused exasperation. "You couldn't just ask first," she teased, though her fingers trembled slightly as she removed the elegant solitaire nestled against dark velvet. "I thought I was," Antonio replied, uncharacteristic uncertainty softening his features as he waited for her answer. The most important negotiation of his life conducted without preparation or strategic advantage, simply honest vulnerability beneath twinkling holiday lights. The wedding was everything their relationship had been, unconventional, intimate, and entirely their own. No elaborate cathedral or hundreds of guests, just close friends and reconciled family members gathered in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden as spring bloomed around them. Maggie took her role as flower girl with characteristic seriousness, practicing her petal-tossing technique for weeks before the ceremony. Her dress, a miniature version of Rachel's simple, elegant gown, swirled around her legs as she preceded her mother down the petal-strewn path. Antonio's mother dabbed at tears with a lace handkerchief. Her initial reservations about Rachel transformed into fierce approval over months of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. "She makes you human again," the matriarch had declared, bestowing her blessing with the authority that had guided the family through decades. The transition from feared leader to respected businessman hadn't been without challenges: former associates testing boundaries, competitors probing for weakness, the occasional reminder that his past remained uncomfortably close to his present. Each situation handled with the same calculated precision, though now directed toward protection rather than power. Rachel's culinary career flourished under Chef Bernard's mentorship, her natural talent finally finding professional expression after years of practical compromise. Antonio found unexpected joy in supporting her ambitions, their partnership stronger for being built on mutual respect rather than dependency. "Daddy, watch me," Maggie called from the small practice kitchen they'd installed in the renovated basement of their brownstone. The title, adopted spontaneously 6 months after the wedding, still triggered an emotional response Antonio couldn't quite contain each time he heard it. The adoption papers were finalized on Maggie's 4th birthday, a legal recognition of the bond that had formed since that first airplane encounter. The celebration afterward combined birthday cake and official family photographs, Maggie's infectious joy bridging any remaining gaps between extended family members. The framed crayon drawing from the airplane hung prominently in Antonio's home office, the first gesture of connection that had inadvertently changed 3 lives forever. Occasionally during difficult negotiations, he would find his gaze drawn to those simple purple stick figures, a reminder of what truly constituted success. Rachel's first restaurant review appeared in the New York Times, the critics' lavish praise confirming what Antonio had always recognized. Her talent deserved recognition beyond their family table. He framed the article beside Maggie's school artwork, their home a testament to achievement measured in multiple dimensions rather than singular pursuit of power. Antonio's legitimate businesses expanded thoughtfully rather than aggressively. Real estate developments focused on community improvement, investment portfolios balanced between profit and social impact, consulting services offered to those navigating complex regulatory environments. Success measured differently now, though no less meticulously. "You've gone soft, Tony," his cousin Paolo remarked during a rare family gathering where past and present intersected without conflict. The observation carried no judgment, merely recognition of transformation visible to those who had known Antonio in his previous incarnation. Rachel's gentle laugh drifted from the kitchen where she supervised Maggie's increasingly ambitious culinary experiments. "Not soft," Antonio corrected, watching his wife and daughter through the doorway. "Just invested in different assets now." The nightmares came less frequently, though they never disappeared entirely. The past not erased but gradually relegated to proper perspective as present joys and future possibilities took precedence in Antonio's thoughts, each morning bringing new appreciation for the simple miracle of ordinary happiness. "Do you ever miss it?" Rachel asked one evening as they sat on their small rooftop garden, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river like a constellation of earthbound stars. "The power, the control, the empire you built. Do you regret the choice?" Antonio considered the question with the thoroughness he brought to all important matters, weighing the complex truth against simplified response. "I miss certain aspects," he admitted finally, his honesty a gift he reserved exclusively for her, "but I've never regretted the trade." Their 5th anniversary brought unexpected news. Rachel's pregnancy confirmed just as she received an offer to partner in opening a new restaurant. The timing seemed impossible, yet they approached the challenge as they had every other, with practical planning and shared commitment to possibilities rather than limitations. "Will the baby have my room?" Maggie asked with the directness of childhood, her concern practical rather than emotional as she helped paint the nursery walls a cheerful yellow. Antonio assured her that her space remained her own, the family expanding rather than rearranging priorities. The photograph on their mantel captured it perfectly. Antonio no longer the tired man from that first flight, Rachel's confident smile reflecting her professional success, Maggie growing into her own person between them. What began as an encounter at 30,000 feet had grounded them all in unexpected ways. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, as your support is important for me to continue sharing these stories. Remember that small acts of kindness, like Maggie's broken cookie, can change someone's life forever, even the most unlikely person's.